the reach that we have. So, our assessment, early on, a great percentage of our cost is in the assessment tools. Now, we're so much heavier on the data tools now and pushing data to parents rather than creating integrated assessment because too few parents took advantage of it. So one of the things we really try and we spend a lot of effort and a lot of capital on is making sure our data tools can abbreviate that information into something that's meaningful to a mom, that she can grab it a bite-sized chunk when she wants it, and then make sure it's to her, whether it's on Facebook, email, however we can get the information, and we look at it as over a year, she'll get that information enough times that it's meaningful. Where they may not really, the kid runs that game now. In today's world, 8 and over, those kids run the game. And the parents are just they don't have as much access to even the kids' panels, right? That it's hard for them to get access. So it's a whole other set of problems when the kid has their own phone. I mean, it's amazing. My daughters are now, my youngest one is 20. I can't even imagine the concept that she was going to have a phone. She was the only one who got one in high school. And to think now these kids have them when they're 8, it was over 25% this year. New phones.
Nolan, could you decode adaptive learning for us and how you inject that into, and how you think about that in gaming? Again, we were talking about this earlier, but Newton has raised $80 million to build this adaptive learning black box. How can you do that in a game? What does that mean? Adaptive or personalized learning within the educational gaming world.
We build our games around 5 principles. First is extreme time pressure. That pushes the student into a present state. They're not thinking about what they're doing after school. They're not thinking about the cute girl in front of them. They're in the present. Second, active. If you put a student in an fMRI and watch the brain activity, you can show them a lecture, you can show them a movie, you can have them even read a book. Very little is going on. The minute you ask them a question to answer something, all of a sudden there's cognitive functions going on and the brain lights up like a Christmas tree. And that is the learning moment. And even if they answer incorrectly, it's learning. Third principle is play to mastery. It's like it flips a bit in the mind of the student that says, I'm not going to be able to sort of skate by this. I have to know 100% of the content of this game before I can finish it. And the fifth is adaptive. And that kind of is recursive back to the first concept of extreme time pressure. And extreme time pressure is very different for different kids. And all you have to do is have extreme time pressure for the individual. They play against themselves. And so it turns out that there's been a really bad situation in which, for political correctness, kids who are stupid are called slow. Now, it's actually very incorrect because there are very many kids who are cognitively brilliant that just take a little bit more time. But they go through school thinking that they're not that bright, when in fact they're very bright. All they need is a few more seconds, a few more minutes. And so this will be totally invisible to a classroom of 30 kids and a teacher. But with the software that we have, we can detect these kids who are cognitively brilliant, who can basically excel at anything they want to, given just a little bit more time. So those are the principles that we build our content on. What we want to do is to mirror a textbook so that these principles are in place, and we have, we're going to do some actual scientific research, but anecdotally, we are teaching 10 times faster than a classroom. And I believe that when the conversion to online, adaptive, brain-based education happens, that you will be able to complete the standardized curriculum for all 4 years of high school in about 6 months. And you say, well, the kids aren't going to be able to get out of school then. But then all of a sudden, projects and emotional learning and many of the other things that actually start to be much more important. And that's kind of our goal, and that's our pathway.
Osman, one more question on the subject. Just would love to know how you're thinking through balancing fun and learning. To what extent have you, I've got to think, you were injecting, I've got to think, learning objects, and it was more than just digitized textbook. You were building learning into the course materials. Would love to know, to what extent have you borrowed from that in Galaxies? To what extent, again, you're building, balancing the education and entertainment?
Yeah, so at Galaxies, I think the overarching principle we look at is if a kid is giggling while they're learning science, I think we're onto something. Like that's the first thing we're trying to really work through. Then coming to the point of assessment, there are two kinds of assessment. One is called a formative assessment, which happens as you go, and the second is called summative, which happens in the end. And I'm a much bigger fan of formative because you really want to blur the line between learning and fun. It should be the same thing. So by putting assessment at the end, what you're saying is, okay, now you have to learn. So we're really trying to come together in a way where even the assessment should be within the gameplay. It shouldn't take you out of the narrative, out of the story, because then the kid goes back in and out. So what we learned at No was actually some very interesting things, because one of the first things we figured out, we always used to think kids would go to their textbooks, a few times a week. So when we launched the app and kids began to use the textbook, we would see they would come to the book once a week, once every 2 weeks. And we were like, whoa, our app must really suck because kids aren't coming to use the textbook. But as we looked into it, there was the actual behavior that they had. And for the first time, the data was actually coming up on how kids were really behaving and learning and using what they had in school. But what we began to see was how they like to highlight and other things around it. So all this stuff is coming into Galaxies, but the real focus is how can we really blur the line between are they having fun in the narrative versus just this is an assessment tool. Assessment is important, it's critical, otherwise you really don't know how to figure it out, but it has to disappear in the whole process.
Maybe now switching to other business issues. Would love your thoughts. Awesome.
Kind of marketing issues common across
Mike died.
any startup. Well, think about things smaller. Yeah. Sorry.
Cool. As a smaller, earlier stage gaming company, we'd love your thoughts on marketing. Love your thoughts on the necessary evil of iTunes and again, what is the opportunity for a earlier stage, smaller, independent educational gaming studio?
Sure. So, at the early stage of the company, I'm very happy to bet 30% to iTunes and to the App Store. Because when you take a look at customer acquisition cost, it can cost you $30 to $40 to acquire a customer outside when you really do the math. iTunes, if they're charging you 30% of $5, they're bringing you a customer pretty cheap. So in the early stages, it looks expensive, but it's actually a really good deal, right? So I think it's a really smart way to go. Then in the marketing, what we really don't want to do is do the pay-per install, because that's again throwing money down a hole, where many of the apps out there that having installed, and our numbers would look really bad because many of the installers have no intention of actually using the app. So at this stage of the company, it's really marketing more through the app stores And I believe for the next 12 months as a startup, the onus is not on how many can we get 500,000 users to use the product. Because I think in education gaming, it's not a hit-based business where you really got to get all your customers in the first month and then you're declining. I think it's going to go the other way, that as your product builds itself out, if you build a good product with parents talking about it, kids talking about it, I think the curve is going to be different than what I think Monument Valley had when they showed the stats. The biggest day was the first day, and then there are 4 blips. So we think of marketing through the App Store, through word of mouth, but nothing is more important than us making sure we have an excellent product which is tested with kids, and I think things will fall in place after that.
David, would love you to build on that as the one true platform here. Not only the benefits of DreamWorks animation marketing, massive movie budgets, but even just having multiple titles. And also multiple modalities. It's not just apps, but it's browser.
Yeah, it's all about knowing where your product's going to sell. So it's a lot of math, right? Whether you want to be on Apple and make a lot less money and use that as your primary, or you want to be online where your lifetime values might be $100, and the cost of acquiring those customers are much lower because the competition is much lower. So you have to make your decisions on where you're going to start and where you're going to build from. The 2 things I would say about marketing is that, sure, it's a lot better to have a movie brand behind it. We now build the kids' products for the NFL. Although today may not be the best of days, we had a really tough season with them. That season, as Dirk knows, every year football season starts over. The whole country loves it. It's a great product. The marketing works for you. But rule number 1, you launch an app and it doesn't do well, it doesn't get reviewed well, you are now in the cycle, right? You've got to launch a new update, there's got to be new features, because you're never going to get that product from here to there without significant updates. So you've got to have a great game. There's no sense even spending $1 until the game is there. It takes us 6 months, almost every time, to get a game from launch to working. And I don't know what to do about it. We have worked so diligently on making sure that game, kid test is always wrong. The kids are always, I don't know. It's like the kid test went great. We go online, the kids say, first day, you get 500 comments on whatever, vehicle forums, whatever. Why'd you do this? It's so stupid. You should have done that. So we don't, I'm telling you, we go light on the kid testing now. We kind of know our business, and we really try and do those mini launches. So we like to launch things online in hidden spaces, let real kids who are our loyalists, the best kids in some of our other locations, give them a freebie, say, hey, you'll get a free year for someone to do this, fill out the forms, and we learn so much more by doing those types of things. Because, boy, once you get into that store and it doesn't work right away, hey, this crashed, this broke, this isn't right, this isn't fun. It only takes one little thing to, it's like, I don't know where all these 8-year-old critics came from, but the world has turned into Rotten Tomatoes.
They're all the critics, is what it is.
Well, I was just thinking about this. Nothing has changed from 1973, 74, when we would put out a game, and our analytics were really primitive. You'd count the coins in the cash box at the end of the week. If it was empty, you'd have a problem. But we would find that we could iterate, and very often we could take a game that was just crap and turn it into a really good winner. And some of them stayed crap, but the analytics